She was imprisoned in a cage, right in the town center, accused of infertility, until a widower with 2 young daughters halted his wagon, altering everything. The first sight that greeted Icarion McCall as he entered the sun-baked square of Juniper Hollow was the cage. A genuine cage with iron bars stood prominently in the middle of the town, like a haunting monument. It resembled a nightmare, something impossible to overlook. Inside, huddled with her knees drawn to her chest, was a woman, no older than 30, barefoot, her dark brown hair matted to her cheeks. Her dress, streaked with dirt, clung to her thin frame. Bruises marked her wrists, some fresh and purple, others yellow and fading. Her gaze avoided everyone's. Icarion's daughters, Liriana and Alanthus, sat quietly in the back of the wagon. The morning heat was already intense. Liriana, at 9 years old, shielded her younger sister with a bonnet and offered her a canteen. Alanthus, 7, held a worn doll tightly and squinted towards the square. "Why is she in there?" Liriana whispered, tugging at his sleeve. Icarion's grip tightened on the reins. He didn't know the answer, but he was determined to find out. He dismounted from the wagon, leaving the girls in the shade of the canvas. His boots hit the ground with a heavy thud, causing nearby townsfolk to glance up from their benches and porch swings, retreating further into the shadows. Icarion was not a man to be trifled with. He was tall, with broad shoulders from years of timber cutting and fence building. His jaw was shadowed with a 3-day stubble, and his eyes, once fiery, had turned a stormy gray since his wife's passing 2 years prior. He approached the cage, and the woman inside flinched. She didn't cry, speak, or beg. She slowly raised her chin until her eyes met his. They were blue and hollow. Icarion took a deep breath. "Sir," a voice called from behind him, light and overly cheerful. Turning, Icarion found a lanky man in a checkered vest and flat hat, wiping his hands on an apron. "Name's Caleth. I run the general store over there. Are you looking for work supplies?" Icarion didn't respond. He nodded towards the cage. "What did she do?" Caleth chuckled. That. Well, you see, we have rules around here." He stepped closer, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret. "She was married. Didn't bear any children. Years of marriage and not a single child. That's just not natural, is it?" Icarion stared at him. "She's infertile," Caleth clarified, still grinning. "Useless to her husband. He brought her here, donated her to the town, thought we'd put her to use in the stockade, you know. Serve as a warning to others." "She's not livestock," Icarion said, his voice quiet but dangerous. "Well, sure, but rules are rules. Can't let her go now. It would make us look weak." Caleth shrugged. "Shane has no family, no claim, and no use." Liriana had stepped down from the wagon, standing quietly by the wheel. Icarion glanced from his cage to his eldest daughter, then back to the woman inside. She hadn't stirred, just sat there unnaturally still, as if the world had already abandoned her. "What is her name?" Icarion inquired. "I don't know. It doesn't really matter." Caleth dismissed the question with a wave of her hand. "She doesn't talk much." Icarion's jaw tightened, and he pivoted on his heel. He returned to his wagon, lifted both of his daughters inside, and then strode into the general store. He needed only a few items: a sack of flour, a couple of nails, and some rope. He paid with coins and kept his responses brief. But as he turned to exit, he hesitated. "Is there a blacksmith in town?" Caleth blinked, taken aback. "Oh, yes. Behind the saloon." Icarion nodded and walked out. By nightfall, the cage was vacant, and the townspeople were murmuring about how it had happened. Icarion didn't take her home that night. Not immediately. He took her to the forest, to a small clearing where he sometimes camped when the walls of his cabin felt too confining with grief. She didn't speak, didn't inquire about their destination. She simply sat wrapped in the blanket he had given her, watching the trees rush by. Elanthus held her hand. Liriana offered her a piece of cornbread and said, "You can have mine as well." By the time the fire crackled under the stars, the woman finally whispered, "Mirella." Icarion looked up from the kettle. "Is that your name?" She nodded once. "It's a fine name," he said. Mirella stared into the flames, her voice barely a whisper. "You shouldn't have taken me. They will come for you." Icarion didn't respond right away. He poured her a tin cup of broth and placed it beside her. "Let them come." The following morning, a sheriff rode up the trail with 2 deputies. Icarion stood in front of the fire, axe in hand. Mirella was behind him, her arms around Elanthus and Liriana. The sheriff looked uneasy. "Sir, we understand you've taken a woman who has been deemed unclaimed by her kin. She isn't property," Icarion stated. "Well, the law doesn't see it that way." "Then change the law." The deputies shifted uncomfortably. The sheriff frowned. "Now look, I don't want any trouble. Then you'll turn around and inform your town that she's gone." There was a silence that lingered too long. Then one of the deputies muttered, "He's that widower from Jackson's Ridge. Lost his wife last winter." The sheriff looked at the girls clinging to Mirella's skirts. He sighed. "It's not worth the fight. Come on, boys." And just like that, they left. That night, Mirella wept. Not loudly, not wildly, just quietly into her hand. She hadn't cried in front of the girls. She waited until they were asleep and until Icarion was stacking firewood beside the tent. He didn't say a word. He simply sat beside her and offered his hand. She accepted it. The cabin was nestled at the edge of Bear Ridge, a good 3-hour ride from Juniper Hollow, and even farther from the judgmental eyes of men who believed they could own someone's soul. The air up there was cooler, purer. Icarion had constructed the place with his own hands after the passing of Aloria, his wife. In the past, this place had served as a refuge for his sorrow, a tranquil spot where he could honor her memory without the oppressive burden of societal expectations. Now it was transforming into something more, a home. Mirella perched on the porch swing, her skirt neatly arranged around her legs, her eyes following Liriana and Elanthus as they dashed through the tall grass, a scarf tied between them like a banner. They laughed, danced, and tumbled, then dashed off again. She was still adjusting to the sound of children's laughter. She was still adjusting to any noise at all. Inside, Icarion was repairing the doorframe, not because it was damaged, but because he needed something to occupy his hands. He had woken up before dawn again, as he always did, even though the rooster was long gone, and the need to rise early had faded with the farm. Mirella had barely uttered more than a few dozen words since they had left Juniper Hollow, but she brewed coffee in the morning. She assisted Liriana in sewing the hem of her dress. She gently stroked Elanthus's hair when the little girl had a nightmare. She was making an effort, and Icarion noticed every detail. That afternoon he stepped out and offered her a cup of tea. He didn't sit down immediately, instead leaning against the railing and watching the girls frolic in the golden light. "They remind me of what life is meant to be like," she said abruptly. Icarion turned to face her. Mirella continued to stare straight ahead. "They don't look at me as if I'm damaged or cursed or some worthless burden." Icarion remained silent, but she went on. I never chose to be barren. Her voice wavered on the word. My husband, he used to count the days. He blamed me for every month I wasn't pregnant. He told me the Lord had abandoned me. Icarion finally moved, placing his tea down and settling into the seat beside her. Gorath didn't abandon you, he said, his voice steady and calm. People did. Mirella looked at him. Do you think that makes it any easier? He shook his head. No, but it's the truth. She turned her gaze back to the horizon, and for a long while they simply sat there in silence. The peace didn't last. 3 days later, a rider emerged at the edge of the tree line. Icarion was chopping wood, his shirt off in the sun, sweat dripping down his forehead. He spotted the movement and turned quickly, reaching for the rifle leaning against the porch. But it was just a boy, perhaps 15, as thin as a reed, his bare feet dusty, a letter clutched in one trembling hand. Icarion met him halfway down the slope. The boy extended the envelope without a word, then turned and fled. The paper was wrinkled, water-stained. The handwriting was rough but readable. Mirella's eyes scanned it immediately before her legs buckled. Icarion caught her before she hit the ground. What is it? He asked, his voice low. She clutched the letter to her chest, shaking. It's from him, your husband. She nodded, her breath barely audible. Icarion helped her inside, sat her down, poured her some water, and waited. When she finally handed him the letter, her fingers wouldn't stop trembling. It read, My property was taken from Juniper Hollow without my permission. If she isn't returned within a week, there will be repercussions. You are well aware of who I am. No law will shield you. Jorvin Icarion read the note twice, then folded it meticulously, and tucked it into his coat pocket. He remained silent, but his jaw was tightly clenched, as if he might shatter his teeth. That same evening, he fortified the doors, not out of fear, but because he had learned long ago that a man who issues threats in writing often arrives with violence and weapons. Mirella observed him as he secured a second beam across the inside of the front door. I'm so sorry, she murmured. He turned to face her slowly. This isn't your doing. It is, she insisted. It isn't, he repeated firmly. He is the one to blame. Her hands clenched the fabric of her skirt. He never forgets. He never forgives. He'll destroy everything just to punish me. Icarion stood and crossed the room, then gently took her hands in his. Mirella, he said, his voice steady, you are not a possession. You are not a curse, and you are not alone any longer. Her eyes welled up with tears, and she looked away. He gently tilted her chin back toward him. You have no reason to be afraid here. Not of him. Not of anyone. Outside, the girls were collecting pine cones to build their forest palace near the creek. Their laughter echoed through the trees, and for a moment, Mirella believed him, until darkness fell. The knock came just after midnight, soft, polite, almost too courteous. Icarion had barely slept. He was already dressed and seated near the window with his rifle when it came. He opened the door slowly and quietly, leaving the bolt in place. A man stood in the shadows, his face partially obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. Behind him stood 2 more figures, silent as the night. Good morning, the man said. Icarion didn't respond. The stranger lifted his hat just enough to reveal a crooked smile. I'm searching for my wife. Icarion's gaze didn't waver. She's not here at the moment. It's unfortunate, because I was informed that she is, and that you are the one who took her. Icarion didn't react. She's not your wife. She's mine by covenant. Not anymore, the man countered, his smile widening. Well, that's not for you to decide. Icarion raised the rifle slightly. It is if you don't leave. There was a long pause. Then the man's smile vanished. You have no idea who you're dealing with, friend. I don't care, Icarion replied. The man took a step back. We'll return, he said coldly. With papers and men. Icarion closed the door before the words had finished echoing. Then he secured every bolt. The following morning, Mirella sat by the hearth, her arms wrapped around the girls. I should leave, she whispered. No, Icarion said firmly. If I go, he won't harm you or them. He already threatened them. That makes it my battle. She stood. You could lose everything. He stepped toward her. I lost everything years ago. But this, he gestured to the room, to the girls, to her. This might be the first thing worth fighting for since then. She covered her mouth to suppress a sob, and when she reached out to him, he didn't hesitate. He gripped her firmly, steadfast and unyielding, but by week's end, the safety of Icarion's cabin was compromised. He had spotted smoke trails near the eastern ridge and fresh hoofprints by the stream. The traps he had set were untouched, but someone had triggered them all. On the sixth evening, Liriana jolted awake with a scream. Mirella rushed into the girl's room to find Alanthus trembling in her sister's embrace. There was a man, Liriana murmured, in the window. Icarion stepped outside at once, rifle at the ready. There were no footprints, no sounds, but he knew they were being watched, and their patience would not last forever. Icarion did not sleep again after that night. He patrolled the perimeter with his rifle slung over his shoulder and a pistol concealed beneath his coat. He reinforced the front door with an additional layer and moved the girls' mattresses into the central room, closer to the fire and away from the windows. Every night the sound of breaking twigs made him pause. Every rustle of wind turned his stomach. He had encountered men like Jorvin before, smooth-talking deceivers who manipulated scripture and law to bend others to their will. They did not fight fairly. They did not fight honorably. They fought to possess, to control, to conquer. And Icarion had endured too much grief in his life to let fear take hold. By the third day, Mirella could see the burden weighing him down. He had not shaved, and his eyes were red-rimmed from lack of sleep. But every time she touched his arm or offered him a cup of tea, he smiled gently and repeated the same words. I am fine. He was not truly, but he was trying for them, for her. The girls were anxious. Icarion constructed a small fort of blankets near the hearth and regaled them with tales of mountain bears that transformed into gentle cows in the summer. Mirella baked what little flour they had into a flat, chewy bread and sang lullabies in a voice so soft it barely carried past her lips. For a few hours each day they pretended the danger was not real. But on the fifth night it arrived at their doorstep. It began with a bang, not at the door, but at the back wall of the cabin. A heavy object crashed through, splintering a window and shattering the glass. Icarion leapt from his chair, rifle in hand. Take the girls to the crawl space, he ordered Mirella, already heading for the corner where he kept spare ammunition. She did not hesitate. The children scrambled, half asleep, but Mirella's voice was steady. She guided them to the hatch beneath the rug, lifted it, and helped each one down, pressing a kiss to their hair before lowering the cover and placing a bench over it. By the time she turned back around, Icarion was at the door, breathing heavily. Then, silence. Mirella's heart pounded in her ears. A minute passed, then two. The wind howled. Icarion did not move. She crept toward the window, staying low. But as she reached for the curtain, Icarion raised a hand to stop her. Then a voice outside, cold and mocking. "Didn't think I'd find you up here, preacher." Icarion did not respond. A chuckle echoed through the air. "You've always had a soft heart. That's what she admired about you, right? Always taking in strays." Mirella's breath hitched. She recognized that voice. Jet. Icarion cautiously opened the door, rifle still aimed. Mirella remained concealed behind the wall, her heart pounding. "Leave," Icarion growled, his voice stern and unyielding. "There's nothing here for you." "Oh, but there is," Jorvin retorted, stepping into the moonlight. His malicious grin was illuminated by the silver light. "You have something that belongs to me. She was never yours. She was my wife, by law and by covenant. And she took something of mine as well." Icarion's gaze hardened. "She doesn't possess anything that belongs to you." "She does," Jorvin snarled. "Cruiser. You think I didn't notice how she fled? She took the savings from the church collection, my ring, and the finest horse I owned." Icarion stood his ground. "She didn't steal? She escaped?" Jorvin's smile was pure malice. "You don't get to make that call." From the shadows, 2 more men appeared, weapons drawn. One held a torch. "Here's what's going to happen," Jorvin declared. "You send her out. She comes willingly. No trouble, no bloodshed." Icarion's expression didn't waver. "And if she refuses?" Jorvin took a step forward. "Then we'll burn you out, you and those girls." "I'll take her anyway. This time, I'll ensure she can't escape." That was the final straw. Icarion raised his rifle and fired. The bullet narrowly missed Jorvin, striking the ground mere inches from his foot. "The next shot will be through your skull," Icarion stated coldly. Jorvin didn't react, but his companions did. One of them muttered, "Back off." Jorvin turned slowly. "Afraid of a man who shelters orphans under his roof?" But the others didn't move. They weren't prepared to die for this. Jorvin spat into the snow and retreated. "This isn't finished," he warned before disappearing into the woods. Icarion waited until the others had followed, then secured the door. Inside, Mirella stood shaking. She hadn't uttered a sound. Icarion's gaze met hers, and he gently placed a hand on her arm. "Are you all right?" She nodded, but her eyes held more than just fear. "I can't allow him to do this to you," she whispered. "He won't," Icarion assured her. "You don't know what he's capable of." "I don't care," she replied. "He'll have to go through me first." She closed her eyes. "He will." The following morning, Icarion rode into town. Mirella tried to dissuade him, but he was resolute. "I'll be quick," he promised. "I just need to speak with someone who still believes in justice." He left her with a pistol and clear instructions. "Don't open the door for anyone but me." She watched him ride away, then gathered the girls close. They spent the day indoors, crafting dolls from fabric and sketching with charcoal on old canvas. But as evening fell and Icarion hadn't returned, Mirella's hands began to tremble. She put the girls to bed early, lit a single lamp, and sat by the door, her eyes fixed on the forest. The wind wailed and the floorboards creaked. Then a knock. Unlike Icarion's, unlike anyone's. Sharp, aggressive. She grasped the pistol. "Who is it?" She rang the bell. There was no response. Then she heard Liriana's voice calling out, "Melorine, let me in." Mirella's heart pounded in her chest. She rushed to the bedroom, only to find the bed empty. All 3 girls were missing. A chill ran down her spine. The knocking sounded again. This time, the voice was softer, pleading. Then it turned into men's laughter. She hurried to the window and peeked through the curtain. 2 horses were there, but no sack, no clatter. Mirella let out a scream. She quickly put on her boots, grabbed her pistol and rifle, and dashed into the night. Snow fell heavily, and the forest surrounded her. She followed the hoofprints, praying, crying, and whispering their names. She didn't know how long she ran, but finally, at the base of an old ravine, she saw a fire and 3 small figures tied near a tree. Mirella's breath came in short, ragged gasps as she hid behind the tree line, rifle gripped tightly in her hands. Her knuckles were white from the cold and her tight grip, but her eyes never left the firelight below the ridge. The 3 girls, Liriana, Brenara, and Raverin, were huddled together, bound at the wrists and ankles, wrapped in an old blanket, their heads resting against one another. Liriana stirred occasionally, but she wasn't fully awake. They were alive. Thank Gorth. Jorvin sat by the fire, sharpening a knife with slow, deliberate strokes. His back was to the girls, and one of the other men, the older one who had hesitated the night before, paced in tight circles, clearly uneasy. "She ain't coming," he muttered. "You said he'd leave her and run to town. But what if he comes back with a badge or worse?" "He won't," Jorvin replied, his tone too calm. "That preacher's got no one. Just a broken house, a broken heart, and now a broken woman. He thinks he can protect her, but it's a fool's game. Even so, these are just girls." Jorvin looked up, the knife still in his hand. "They're leverage. You want to get her out of the house. You need a reason. Women don't come when you call him anymore. They need persuasion." The other man didn't argue, but the tension in his shoulders showed he wanted to. Mirella's stomach churned. This wasn't just about her anymore. It never had been. She remembered the bruises, the cold stares, the isolation. And now these 3 innocent girls, used as pawns in the same game she had barely escaped. She couldn't let this happen again. Quietly, she slid down the ridge, staying low, moving between trees, stepping lightly on patches of snow where the ground was less likely to crunch. She was close now, 30 paces at most, but a twig snapped under her boot. Jorvin's head whipped around. "Who's there?" he demanded. The older man froze. Then another twig snapped, but not from Mirella's direction. From the opposite side of the clearing, a shadow emerged from the trees. A tall, broad-shouldered man with a rifle, Icarion. Mirella's heart nearly stopped. He stepped into the firelight like a ghost risen from the grave. "I told you once," he said, his voice like ice. "You'd have to deal with me first." Jorvin rose deliberately, his gaze sharpening. "Well, well, look who's returned, preacher." He discarded the knife and went for his pistol, but Icarion acted swiftly. His rifle was already aimed. The shot reverberated through the woods like a clap of thunder. Jorvin's pistol was knocked from his grasp as the bullet hit it squarely. He roared in pain, tumbling backward, clutching his injured hand. Icarion faced the older man. "Take a step back." The man paused, then released his weapon and lifted his hands. Icarion acted quickly, freeing the girls. Liriana stirred and immediately clung to him, weeping onto his shoulder. Brenara let out a soft whimper. Raverin was still disoriented. That was when Mirella emerged from behind him, tears streaming down her face. "I thought you were lost," he panted. I went to the sheriff and told him everything, but he refused to come." "What do you mean?" "He's afraid of Jorvin's influence. He said it was a family matter, and he gave me this instead." He pulled out a folded document, a temporary guardianship affidavit, appointing him as the caretaker of the girls in the absence of relatives. "It's not ideal, but it's a start." Jorvin was still moaning by the fire, gripping his mangled hand. Icarion loomed over him. "If you ever approach her again, I won't hesitate next time." Jorvin coughed up blood. "She belongs to me." "No," Mirella declared, stepping forward. Icarion attempted to hold her back, but she moved past him, standing over the man who had once confined her, deemed her unworthy, and now sought to harm innocence as a means of revenge. She gazed down at him, her eyes gleaming in the firelight. "You're the one who's barren, Jorvin. You're the one who's empty." She turned to Icarion. "Let's leave." The journey back was gradual and quiet. Icarion cradled Raverin in his arms while the others rode with Mirella in the wagon they had concealed in the bushes. They didn't halt until they reached the cabin. Icarion sank by the hearth, embracing all three girls while Mirella prepared broth and wrapped their feet in warm blankets. No one spoke for a long time. There was too much to express and too little energy to do so. Later that night, Icarion and Mirella stood in the kitchen, illuminated only by a single candle. "I let you down," Icarion murmured. "I should have stayed. You rescued them. I allowed him to get too close. You prevented anything from happening, and you came back." She paused, then reached into her skirt pocket. "I found this in the snow." She held up a silver chain, his late wife's locket, the one she had noticed him wearing their first night. He gazed at it for a long time, then took her hand and gently closed it over the locket. "She wanted me to give this to someone who saves lives," he said. "You did that tonight?" Mirella fought back tears. "I couldn't have done it alone." "You didn't." They stood there, hands joined. Not lovers, not yet family, but something far more profound than either had imagined in years. And for the first time in a long while, the night didn't feel oppressive. The following day, the sheriff arrived. He didn't appear proud or assured. He looked weary. "Icarion? I heard the gunshots. You were fortunate." Icarion remained silent. The sheriff turned his gaze to Mirella. "I can obtain a restraining order. It will keep him at a distance of 50 meters, but if he has allies, you must be prepared." "We are prepared," Mirella affirmed. The sheriff gave a single nod. "The townsfolk are discussing the situation," he murmured. Perhaps they had misjudged the threat. Perhaps everything. Mirella did not reply. He tipped his hat and rode away. That afternoon, Icarion constructed a fence around the cabin, not out of fear, but to delineate the space they now considered secure. Mirella sat on the porch, Liriana in her lap, weaving a ribbon into her hair. "Are you all right?" he inquired. She nodded. "More than all right." Then Liriana looked up at Icarion, her voice barely a whisper. "Papa?" He paused. Mirella glanced up. Liriana's cheeks flushed. "I mean, may I call you that? Just occasionally?" Icarion knelt before her, his eyes glistening. "You may call me whatever you wish, dear." She wrapped her arms around his neck, and he held her as if she were his own. That night, Mirella finally wept, not from fear, but from the sensation of being embraced, of being safe, of being chosen. But the past has a way of resurfacing. A week later, a courier delivered a letter. There was no return address, only a wax seal and a single sentence inside. "See you soon, little dove." The letter lay on the mantel for hours, unopened after Mirella first saw it. She recognized the wax seal. The uneven imprint in the crimson wax was the kind that left a bitter taste and numb fingers. Only 2 people ever used that seal, and one of them was supposed to be deceased. Icarion found her still staring at the envelope long after sunset, her hands shaking, her lips pale. He approached her quietly. "Mirella, who sent it?" She opened her mouth, closed it again, then finally whispered. "His brother, Saradin Taffer." Icarion's heart sank. "The one who vanished." "No, he did not vanish. He fled. Her voice cracked as she picked up the letter and handed it to him, unable to read the words again. Icarion unfolded the page. There was no signature, only the sentence she had already shared. "See you soon, little dove." Icarion folded the paper slowly, his hand visibly tightening around it. "What does it mean?" She looked up at him, eyes wide. "It means he knows where I am, and he is coming." Icarion did not hesitate. That very night he boarded up the cabin windows, stacked fresh firewood beside the doors, and took out both rifles to clean by the flickering light of the stove. Mirella sat silently, mending the frayed edges of the girls' coats, her face expressionless. The girls, Liriana, Bernara, and Raverin, sensed the tension. They stayed close to Mirella, assisting in small ways, bringing water, folding laundry, and whispering prayers when they thought she couldn't hear. 2 days passed without incident. Then the tracks appeared. A single horse had ridden the perimeter of their land at dawn, never coming close enough to confront, but close enough to be noticed. Icarion discovered the tracks himself. Icarion's horse, hoofprints, stirred up the damp earth, prowling around the property like a predator stalking its prey. Mirella didn't need him to say a word. She already sensed the truth. That night, after the girls had gone to sleep, Mirella finally shared the entire story with Icarion. "It wasn't just Jorvin who imprisoned me," she confessed, her voice barely rising above the crackling fire. "Saradon was far worse, far more cunning. He manipulated the laws and twisted promises. He persuaded Jorvin, and once I was broken, he turned the entire town against me." Icarion listened, his jaw tight with anger. "I never told anyone because no one would believe me. He was respected, generous. Everyone thought he was a saint." She paused, her hands trembling in her lap. "Jorvin was cruel, but Saradon, he was methodical. The cage, that was his idea. He called it a biblical symbol, said I was being refined like silver." Icarion couldn't stay seated any longer. He stood and began to pace, his fury growing like a storm surge. "He wanted to shatter you, so you'd return to him willingly," Mirella whispered. "I refused, so he made sure no one else ever would." Icarion halted, his resolve hardening. He won't get that chance again. The following morning, Icarion rode into town seeking assistance, but his efforts were met with resistance. Sheriff Dornvale intercepted him outside the jailhouse, his arms crossed and a troubled expression on his face. "Saradon Silverford?" the sheriff asked, skepticism clear in his voice. "You're certain?" "I've seen his seal." Mirella had recognized it. Dornvale sighed heavily. "Even if it is him, I can't issue a warrant based on a letter. You told me yourself that Jorvin had allies. Saradon was one of them." The sheriff glanced at the ground. "Saradon has powerful friends. If I act too hastily, I'll lose this badge." Icarion's jaw clenched, and he reached for the sheriff's badge. "Give it to someone who isn't afraid to do what's right," he demanded. Dornvale didn't respond, simply turned and walked away. Icarion left town with a heavier heart than when he had arrived. Upon returning to the cabin, he found Mirella and the girls in the barn, which they had converted into a temporary classroom. Liriana was teaching the youngest their letters. Bernara was sketching in the dirt with a stick, and Raverin was playing with the doll Icarion had carved. For a moment everything seemed ordinary, but then he noticed the shadow lurking just beyond the trees. He approached the porch silently, loaded both rifles, and ushered Mirella and the girls inside. Night fell swiftly, bringing with it an unsettling silence. Icarion took the first watch. Mirella insisted on taking the second. Just after midnight, she sat by the window, a lantern flickering softly beside her, a rifle resting across her lap. That's when the whistling began, a slow, chilling melody that was all too familiar. Her blood ran cold. She rose slowly and stepped onto the porch. The tune echoed from the trees, and then his voice, "Little dove, all grown up." She stiffened. A figure emerged from the darkness, tall, clean-shaven, and smiling. "Saradon Silverford." "Put your hands where I can see them," she ordered, her rifle steady. He laughed softly. "I'm not here for violence," he said. "Neither am I," she replied. He advanced a pace. Icarion emerged behind her, weapon drawn. "Halt right there." Saradon cocked his head. "Still playing the devoted family man, are you? You have 5 seconds to leave this property. Or else?" Saradon smirked. "You'd shoot me in front of the children if necessary." Saradon moved closer. Icarion fired a shot into the ground between them. Dirt burst upward. Saradon recoiled. "All right," he growled. "But she'll come to me eventually. They always do." Mirella stepped forward. "Not this time," she declared. Saradon's gaze locked onto hers. His facade slipped for a moment, revealing the cruelty beneath. "You'll live to regret this." Then he disappeared into the darkness. The following day, they started to prepare for their departure. Icarion was reluctant to go. Mirella was hesitant as well, but staying was no longer an option. They loaded as much as they could into the wagon. The girls assisted in silence, tears welling in their eyes. That evening, as the sun began to set, Mirella took one last look at the cabin that had been her sanctuary. Then Liriana tugged at her sleeve. "Do we have to flee again?" Mirella knelt beside her. "We're not fleeing, dear. We're choosing a different path. Will we still have a home?" Mirella smiled softly. "Home is wherever love resides." Icarion joined them, adding, "And it resides with us." They departed as the stars started to appear in the sky. But Saradon was not finished. He had left something behind. Far away, the sheriff stood in his office, reading a letter delivered by a private courier. It was a summons from a state judge, requested by Saradon. A claim of illegal adoption, asserting that Mirella had taken 3 children from their rightful guardians. A warrant was included, and at the bottom of the page was Saradon Silverford's signature. The sheriff muttered a curse, then grabbed his coat. He was unsure whether he was going to uphold the law or defy it. Snow fell heavily on the pass as the wagon rumbled along the narrow trail. Icarion sat at the reins, hands red and chapped despite the gloves. Mirella rode in the back with the girls, bundled tightly in every blanket they owned. The wind wailed through the mountains like a tormented beast. They were 3 days away from their old cabin, heading west with no specific destination, only away. Raverin coughed softly in her sleep. Liriana held her closer. Mirella placed a hand on the child's forehead. Warm, too warm. She looked to Icarion, who glanced back, his eyes filled with silent concern. They couldn't afford to stop, not with a man like Saradine pursuing them. And yet the youngest was burning with fever. "Next town," Icarion said, interpreting her expression. "We'll stop," she agreed, knowing he would stop anyway, even if it cost him everything. They didn't reach the town that night. It was Liriana who noticed it first. A figure on horseback far behind them, just a dark speck cresting a ridge, but drawing nearer. He stayed at a distance for hours, never too close, never far enough to ignore. Icarion urged the horse faster, but they were moving slowly, too slowly for a pursuit. Mirella tightened her grip on the rifle, scanning the trees for any hint of an ambush. By the time they set up camp, night had long since fallen. Icarion discovered a shallow cave beneath a ridge, concealed behind a thicket of pines. It wasn't perfect, but it offered shelter from the rain and a single entrance and exit. He had endured worse during his time at war. They shared the remaining supplies from the saddlebags with the girls. Mirella cradled Raverin throughout the night, murmuring prayers to combat the fever, while the others huddled together for warmth. Icarion stood watch again, his gaze fixed on the dark woods, his heart pounding with every rustle of leaves. Then it happened, not from the front, but the side. A whisper, not a voice, a breath. He spun around swiftly, gun raised, only to find an empty forest. Yet the sensation of being observed lingered. Dawn couldn't arrive soon enough. As they prepared the wagon for departure, Mirella hesitated at the tree line. She intended to retrieve something. A button, gold-edged, polished, and inscribed with a crest. Her heart turned to ice. It belonged to Saradon's coat. He had been there, watching, listening. She tucked it into her pocket, keeping it a secret from Icarion. Not yet. Not with the girls present. By midday, Raverin's fever had intensified. She remained unresponsive. Mirella wept silently as she dabbed a damp cloth on her daughter's forehead. "I think I know someone," Icarion murmured, his voice barely audible. "An old friend. We served together years ago. He lives on a homestead 2 valleys away. We'd be safe there." Mirella looked up. "Can we trust him?" Icarion nodded. "He's the one man who never abandoned me when they discovered the infertility." He spoke frankly, but Mirella understood the implication. This friend had remained loyal when the entire town had turned their backs. "Then lead us there," she said. "Take us now." He did. The homestead materialized like a vision at dusk. A log house nestled between 2 cliffs, smoke billowing from the chimney. A tall figure emerged as they drew near, a man with a beard that reached his chest and eyes that sparkled with recognition. "Icarion!" the man called out, hurrying down the hill, his boots crunching the snow. "Well, I'll be. I thought you were dead. I feel dead most days." Icarion responded with a weary smile. They embraced like brothers. "Mirella, this is Jorvin Hunt," Icarion introduced. "We fought together in the 41st. Jorvin tipped his hat to her and smiled at the girls. "You've gathered quite the family, I see." Icarion didn't respond. He didn't need to. Jorvin guided them inside. The house was cozy, the fire roaring. Jorvin's wife, a warm-hearted woman named Ellen, brought blankets and stew. They settled Raverin in the back bedroom and sent for the local healer, who arrived by sled before dawn. The elderly woman administered bitter root and willow bark to Raverin, reciting prayers over the child. "She'll recover," she assured Mirella. "You're fortunate you warmed her up when you did." Mirella burst into tears of relief. Icarion held her tightly. For the first time in days, they found a moment of respite. But tranquility is delicate, and it rarely endures. That afternoon, as the girls enjoyed the warmth, Icarion ventured outside for a breath of fresh air, and Jorvin accompanied him. 2 cups of coffee were steaming in the cold air. "She's incredibly strong," Jorvin remarked, his gaze fixed on the door. "She's the strongest person I've ever encountered." Jorvin nodded thoughtfully. "She reminds me of a girl I once knew, but they shattered her spirit." Icarion didn't inquire about who. They stood quietly for a moment, observing the snow gently falling from the tree branches. Then Jorvin uttered something peculiar. "You know, not many people get a second chance like this." Icarion glanced over. Jorvin's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I mean, how often does a man come across a woman like her? Beautiful, loyal, capable of bearing children." Icarion's blood ran cold. What are you implying? Jorvin's smile faded. I'm implying that I've heard about Silverfoot. I know what he's proposing. Icarion took a step back. You've spoken to him. Jorvin remained silent. Icarion's voice rose. You assured me that you could be trusted. Jorvin's hand moved to his hip. I can be, but I have debts, Icarion. Old ones. You know how tough it is out here. Icarion didn't hesitate. He lunged forward. The coffee mugs tumbled into the snow as the two men clashed. Jorvin reached for his pistol, but Icarion was quicker. Fueled by rage, he overpowered Jorvin, slamming him against the barn wall. If you even consider telling that man where she is, I already have. A heavy silence fell. Icarion stiffened. Jorvin grinned, blood on his teeth. He'll be here by sundown. Icarion's fist acted before he could think. Jorvin collapsed into the snow, unconscious. Icarion turned and fled. Inside the house, Mirella had just finished fastening Raveren's coat when Icarion rushed through the door. We must leave immediately, he urged. What's happening? He didn't respond. He began gathering bags, blankets, and supplies. Mirella didn't press further. She could see the betrayal, the danger, and the fear in his eyes. She gathered Raveren, woke the others, and within moments, they were back in the wagon, hurtling down the slope. They didn't get far. Gunshots echoed from the trees. The horse screamed and reared, causing the wagon to topple onto its side. Mirella shielded the girls as they crashed into the snow. Icarion hit the ground hard, but quickly rose, rifle in hand. Men emerged from the woods. 3 of them, one wearing a dark coat with a missing button. Saradon. He approached slowly, a smile on his face. That was quite the escape. But you always did enjoy making things complicated, didn't you, little dove? Mirella stood, positioning herself between him and the girls. Icarion aimed his rifle. Don't, Saradon warned. You shoot me, my men will kill your girls. You know they will? Icarion didn't lower the gun. Mirella spoke. What do you want, Saradon? He tilted his head. Just you? That's all I've ever wanted. You want a prize? She said coldly. Not a partner. I want what's mine. You never owned me. He stepped closer. Icarion fired. The shot narrowly missed Saradon's head, but struck the man beside him. The man fell instantly. In the commotion, Mirella grabbed Raveren and shouted for the girls to flee. Liriana seized Bernara and Raveren's hands and sprinted toward the trees. Saradon leaped forward. Icarion intercepted him. The 2 men clashed in the snow, blows exchanged, blood mingling with the cold flakes. Saradon possessed great strength, but Icarion was driven by more than mere pride. He was battling for his family's safety. Mirella snatched the fallen man's pistol and discharged a warning shot into the sky. Halt! Both men halted. Saradon stood, breath ragged, blood trickling from his lip. You'll live to regret this, he snarled. I already do, Mirella replied, tears welling in her eyes. But no longer. In the distance, sirens wailed. Sheriff Dornvale arrived shortly after, weapon drawn. Saradon attempted to flee, but the sheriff's bullet struck him in the leg. He collapsed, howling in pain. The lawmen swiftly apprehended the others. Saradon was hauled away, spewing threats and vows, but Mirella paid him no heed. She was already rushing to her daughters. That evening, as the fire burned in their new campsite, Icarion sat with Mirella and the girls under the starlit sky. He held her hand. She cradled Raveren, and Liriana rested her head on his shoulder, murmuring, Are we safe now, Doveren? Icarion looked to Mirella. She nodded gently. Yes, he whispered. We are. Yet a spark of uncertainty lingered in his heart. Not because Saradon was at large, but because true peace for people like them was always temporary, never permanent. The town of Bellage lay still under a gloomy sky, spring rain transforming the dirt paths into mud. 3 weeks had passed since Ceradon's capture, and though his threats were silenced behind bars, his presence still haunted the minds of Mirella and Icarion. The girls had adapted more quickly. Raverin's fever had vanished, and she laughed once more. Liriana shadowed Icarion's every move, clutching his hand, imitating his actions as he worked with rope or cleaned the rifle. Brenara and Aloria danced barefoot through the cabin, their anxieties left behind in the ruins of their past. But Mirella, she still woke at night. Sometimes Icarion found her by the window, arms wrapped around herself, gazing into the woods as if expecting someone. "I keep thinking," she murmured one night. "He's out there. He'll return." Icarion did not deceive her. He might. She nodded, unsurprised. "But this time," he added, drawing her close, "he'll have to face me first." Their bond did not speak of marriage, not yet, not openly, but it was evident in the way he comforted her when she wept, in the way she tended to him after his labors, in the way the girls called him father without prompting, and in the way he did not correct them. One morning, the sheriff arrived. It was barely dawn when hoofbeats echoed up the hill. Icarion was on the porch with coffee when Sheriff Dornvale dismounted, his hat dripping, his expression grave. Icarion's heart sank. Mirella emerged moments later, carrying Raverin. "You should sit," Dornvale advised. They complied. The sheriff cleared his throat. "Ceradon has escaped." Mirella tightened her grip on Icarion's arm. 3 nights past, a prisoner transfer was attacked. 2 deputies were killed. Rumors suggest he wasn't acting solo. Icarion's jaw tightened. Bounty hunters and his own kin, men who think like him, could aid his escape or help him complete his mission. Mirella's face drained of color. "There's more to the story," the sheriff confided, his voice dropping. Before he departed, he uttered something, repeating it to every inmate in the cell. Icarion looked up, his expression serious. The sheriff paused before continuing. He mentioned retrieving what was rightfully his and disposing of what wasn't. A heavy silence settled over the porch. Mirella murmured about the girls. Icarion rose to his feet. No one questioned the necessity of their actions. They hurried, packing only the essentials. Food, rifles, water, and the girls' beloved toys were loaded onto the wagon by sundown. The sheriff assigned 2 deputies to trail behind them and send word ahead to a town farther west, one that was safer, where identities could be changed, and new lives quietly started. They traveled as far as necessary. This time there would be no cave, no friend's homestead, no one to rely on but each other. And perhaps that would be sufficient. They set out before dawn. The girls were bewildered but didn't question the urgency. They had learned to trust Icarion's commands, to move swiftly when he gave the order. Mirella sat in the back of the wagon, a rifle across her lap, holding Raverin close. Liriana snuggled beside Icarion on the wagon seat. "Where are we headed, Dovarin?" she asked softly. He offered a faint smile. "Somewhere no one knows our names," he replied. She blinked, processing his words. "Will Mama be there too?" she asked after a moment. It took him a moment to respond. "She already is," he said finally. The road narrowed by mid-morning, the forest, encroaching on either side. They moved more slowly, scrutinizing every fork in the trail. Icarion kept one hand on his gun at all times. Mirella did the same. Liriana drifted off to sleep. Brenara hummed a tune from the back of the wagon. For a moment the world seemed almost peaceful, until a sharp crack echoed through the trees. Gunfire. The horse reared in fright. The girls screamed. Icarion leaped down from the wagon, rifle raised. Mirella followed his lead, taking cover. She pushed the girls underneath the wagon for safety. Another shot rang out, striking a tree near Icarion. Then silence. "Saradon!" Icarion shouted into the woods. "Don't be a coward!" No response came. Then a voice echoed back. "You took what was mine, Icarion." Saradon stepped into view, rifle pointed, his coat billowing in the wind. A deep scar now marred his cheek, a memento from the escape, or perhaps karma catching up. "You never deserved her," Saradon growled. "And you did," Icarion countered. "You locked her in a cage. You call that love. I call that order." His voice wavered. "I gave her a place, a name. You gave her a hole in the woods. I gave her a choice that struck something." Saradon raised his rifle. Icarion fired first. The shot grazed Saradon's shoulder, sending him spinning behind a tree. Mirella inched forward, took aim, and fired once into the woods. A thud, followed by groaning, revealed his location. She moved cautiously, rifle still aimed, until she found him crumpled by the tree trunk, clutching his side, still breathing. Icarion approached, asking, "Is he alive?" "Barely," she replied. Saradon tried to speak, but blood bubbled at his lips. He studied her, then shifted his gaze to Icarion. "Do you believe she loves you?" he asked. Icarion remained silent. Saradon cleared his throat. "She'll abandon you too once she discovers the truth. Once she sees who you truly are." Mirella moved closer. "I already know," she stated. "And I chose to stay." With that, she turned away. Saradon met his end alone. The sheriff's deputies arrived shortly after, too late to intervene in the altercation, but in time to remove the body. "No more trouble from him," one of them remarked. "I only wish that were certain," Icarion replied, observing his daughters emerge from beneath the wagon. That evening, they set up camp in a clearing near the river. The girls played softly under the starlit sky, while Mirella prepared beans over the fire. Icarion sat beside her, weary from the day's events. She offered him a tin plate. "I rarely express my gratitude," she murmured. "You needn't," she countered gently. "For the girls? For me?" "For not walking away, even when times were tough?" He nodded, his eyes fixed on the dancing flames. "You never asked me to remain," she added. "I thought if you wished to leave, you would. I wanted you to choose to stay." "I'm silent no longer," he said. "I'm asking now," he whispered. She looked up at him. "Stay," he pleaded. "Be their mother, be my wife." Tears filled her eyes. She didn't respond with words. Instead, she leaned in and kissed him. Their marriage ceremony took place 2 days later under a birch tree. It was a simple affair with just the sheriff, a Bible, and many tears. The girls wore flowers in their hair. Liriana presented Icarion with a handmade card that read, "I'm glad you're my real daddy now." He framed it and hung it on the wall of their new home. Years went by. The girls grew into strong, joyful individuals. Icarion and Mirella worked together, building a life that was modest but genuine. People sometimes spoke of the woman who had once been caged, of the man who couldn't have children but ended up with 5 daughters, and of how love didn't always follow conventional paths. Sometimes it appeared when you were injured in the snow. Sometimes it whispered through the bars of a cage, and sometimes it looked like a small girl reaching up for your hand and asking, "Are you my daddy now?" And you responding, "Yes, dear, I am forever." The summers in Glenshire Valley were warm and fragrant. Bees buzzed in the lavender that Mirella had planted by the front step. The cabin, once small and isolated, now bustled with life, its every board and beam filled with a warmth. Toys were strewn across the porch, left behind when laughter drew the girls to the creek. Inside, Liriana sat at the kitchen table, sketching. Brenara was braiding Eloria's hair while Raverin cooed from the cradle Icarion had crafted, swaying with every breeze that drifted through the open window. Mirella stirred soup on the stove, humming a soft tune, her hand resting on her belly. Despite what the doctors had once said, Gorath had written a different future for her. For them. Icarion entered from outside, his hands dirty with earth. He was older now, not in age, but in contentment. After the profound exhaustion that follows healing, when a man sets down his burdens one by one and realizes that his struggles were not for nothing, he leaned over Raverin, gently tickling her nose. She laughed, reaching out to him. Then Mirella turned, wiping her hands on her apron, and found him gazing at her. "What is it?" she asked, a smile playing on her lips. "You were murmuring," he replied. "This? All of this?" She softly smiled, tucking a stray curl behind her ear. "It's not the life we envisioned." "No," he agreed. "It's better." Years later, people still whispered about the woman who had been imprisoned in a cage, but became the most cherished midwife in the valley. About the man who had been banished for being barren, but was now Papa Icarion to every orphan who passed through town. About how their girls were never without love, stories, or someone to rely on. And when strangers inquired how it happened that a man with no kin built the most vibrant home for miles around, the response was always the same. Sometimes, family isn't born. It's chosen. On the anniversary of the day Icarion shattered the lock on Mirella's cage, they maintained a small tradition. Each year she would bake an apple pie, and he would read a passage from the Psalms, just as he had done the morning they left everything behind. This year, as he recited the words, "He sets the solitary in families," Liriana placed a daisy behind his ear and declared him the silliest daddy in Glenshire. Brenara clapped. Eloria shouted, "It's pie time!" And Raverin squealed, crawling toward the table. Mirella watched them all, her heart full. She reached for Icarion's hand beneath the table, and when he squeezed it, her eyes filled with tears. "You saved me," she whispered. He shook his head. "You saved me first." That night, when the girls were asleep and the house was quiet, Icarion and Mirella sat on the porch, listening to the frogs down by the stream. "I still have dreams sometimes," she confessed. "Of that cage, of the people mocking me." "I do too," he said. "Of the silence, the years when I thought I'd never be more than what they said I was." Mirella leaned her head on his shoulder. "But we're not in that place anymore." "No," he agreed. "We're home." She turned to him, her hand resting on her belly. "I was afraid to hope," she said. "After everything I know, I think God knew I needed you first before anything else." Icarion brushed a gentle kiss to her forehead. "I think he knew we all needed each other." Years later, when their children were grown, when the cabin had expanded and the garden stretched down to the water's edge, people still came to visit. Some sought shelter, others needed food. A few just wanted to hear the story. The girls told it best, of course. With wide eyes and proud voices, they'd say, "Mama was in a cage and Papa broke her out, and then we became a family, and we never looked back." And those who listened would nod, deeply moved, their own burdens a little lighter, because the story wasn't about pain, not truly. It was about rescue, redemption, and love found in the most unexpected places. Beneath the vast starry sky and the gentle embrace of hope, Icarion and Mirella found solace in that cozy valley, encircled by the girls who affectionately called him Father, the woman who completed his life, and the serene assurance that every shattered piece could be restored. Through time, through faith, and through love. If this story touched you, give it a like and tell us in the comments. What would you have done if you were in their shoes? Subscribe to Frontier Stories and join us as we continue to tell stories of hope, resilience, and the beautiful, messy truth of Wild West.